Good evening, everyone, and welcome to SocialFlight Live. We have an amazing show for you this evening. NASA astronaut and Navy SEAL Chris Cassidy is here to join us, and I will tell you his life story all the way through to what he is doing today is truly spectacular and an honor in the way that he serves, has served, and continues to serve our country. And so I cannot wait for you to meet him. Before we get started, just a few things. First of all, things are booming out there with aviation events and fly-ins, and you can see it all on SocialFlight.com or the free SocialFlight mobile apps for Apple and Android devices. Just go and check them out. There are tens of thousands of aviation events and destinations. We have our Fly to Win challenge. We just gave away a Lightspeed Delta Zulu headset, and now we're rolling into our next Fly to Win challenge. And that means on August 1st, we are giving away an Aspen E5 electronic flight instrument. That's right, an electronic flight instrument, a glass for your panel, all from Aspen. We're going to be giving that away on August 1st. So that is very exciting. And all you need to do in order to win that is just to download the free app for either Apple or Android. Just type in SocialFlight. It's one word, SocialFlight. Download it. Go check it out, click on the Fly to Win challenge, and all you need to do is check in, even at your local airport, and you are entered in to win. But if you keep getting points by checking in at other airports and get out there and flying, you can get on our leaderboard, and then on the leaderboard, you can get extra entries in order to compete with even better odds in the Fly to Win challenge for that Aspen E5. So be sure to check out all of that. And of course, we also have wings courses in our FAA partnership there. We've got wings courses, we've got aviation maintenance technician courses, and if you're an IA, you can get your IA renewal continuing education hours, those certificates directly through SocialFlight, all completely free. We're here to support General Aviation. Tonight's broadcast is brought to us by Tempest Aero and their amazing line of products, including oil filters, spark plugs, air filters, and now even Tempest fuel pumps. I will tell you, as an A&P and IA myself, I use their products exclusively. That's all I use. I've never been let down by them, and have also been impressed by the fact that they kept their supply chain going through all the challenges that we've had over the past few years, and really just supported General Aviation wonderfully. And of course, they support us here at SocialFlight too. So be sure to check them out at tempestaero.com. Now to tonight's show. I just can't wait to bring him on right now. Chris Cassidy is the embodiment of the idea that anyone with the courage and drive to succeed can achieve greatness. From humble beginnings in New England, here in my neck of the woods, he chose a life of service to our country. First as an elite Navy SEAL, and then as NASA's chief astronaut. During his service in the Navy, he was awarded his first Bronze Star with Combat V, followed by a second Bronze Star for combat leadership service in Afghanistan. In 2004, the platoon he commanded was awarded the Presidential Unit Citation for a 9-day operation in the Zawar-Kili Cave on the Afghanistan-Pakistan border. Following his path from the sea to the stars, Chris was selected as an astronaut in 2004, and he's a veteran of 3 space flights and 10 spacewalks, including flying to the International Space Station aboard the Space Shuttle Endeavour and the Russian Soyuz spacecraft. In total, he has accumulated 377 days in space, including a 6-month space flight in 2020. In 2015, he became NASA's 14th chief astronaut and served for 2 years in that role. And these days, Chris is president and CEO of the National Medal of Honor Museum Foundation in Arlington, Texas. We are going to talk about all of that. Please welcome to SocialFlight Live, Chris Cassidy. Hey there, how are you doing, Chris?
Oh, Jeff, great to be with you. Great to be with you. Thanks very much for inviting me.
I am thrilled to have you here, and I'll tell you from beginning to end, from the work that you started serving our country as a SEAL all the way through to what you're doing today to honor so many. I just want to be able to follow that story through, and I'd like to start with how you got started, kind of in my backyard up here. Tell me a little bit about what brought you to the Navy and kind of drove you on the path to who you are today.
You know, it's interesting. I'm glad you asked this because it really was not this grand plan that I had as a young kid, thinking about. You know, I had family members in the military. None of that. I really didn't have exposure to it. My dad was drafted in the Marine Corps, in the post-Vietnam time frame. Real short stint as a young Marine, but that was all the exposure. So I knew the term Semper Fidelis, I guess, from my dad just briefly. But it wasn't until I got into high school, and I was just a normal kid. I like sports a lot, and I envisioned myself at Boston Celtics were the thing back then. Remember, Bird, Ainge, Parrish, DJ, all those guys, McHale, and I knew I probably wasn't going to be a Boston Celtic, so I wanted to be an NBA basketball referee, and that was my main goal. Actually, I reffed in high school on the side. I was playing, but reffed with young youth teams and things. And then I realized that you got to pay for college because I knew I wanted to go to college. And Jeff, you probably remember the guidance counselor's office had these big, thick books, and you'd thumb through those books looking at colleges. Like that was the internet version of the old school internet searching.
Exactly. That's like all we had to go by.
Yeah, exactly. Probably in aviation terms, where you have to fly with a huge bag of pubs, which you don't need to carry anymore. But, yeah, I remember sitting in the guidance counselor's office thumbing through, and I saw a picture of the Naval Academy buildings and sharp-looking men and women marching around in uniform, and I just felt like that would be a home for me. Like I thought that the regiment would fit my personality, and then I read more, and it's free to go there. You just have to serve in the military for a little bit afterwards, and I was totally fine with all that, but naively didn't know what serving in the military meant, that you could fly airplanes, you can be on ships, you can be on submarines, you could be in the Marine Corps. This is for the Naval Academy, or in the SEAL teams. Didn't know anything about any of that, but I just kind of knew that it would seem like a good fit, and so I applied. It's actually an interesting story about, if you don't mind, like a 2-3 minute story about that process.
That's why you're here.
Yeah, because it really is fundamental to who I am today. So I read on that same page that you have to apply to a congressman's office from your state or senator, and so I did that, and that paperwork went, and I got invited for an interview up in Augusta, Maine, state capital. Went there, interview proceeds nicely, and at the end of it, the woman said, "Okay, good job, Chris. We'll take it from here. We'll send all the information to the academy and you'll hear from us soon." And I thought, I'm done. Like I said, "Okay, so you don't need anything else from me?" Nope, you're good. We're done. We'll get back to you. So I totally believed all that, and so that was the fall of my senior year in high school. Fast forward to the spring of my senior year in high school, everybody's learning if they're in or not to different schools, and I was hearing that from other schools, but nothing from the Naval Academy. And finally, I called the admissions office, and the person on the other end was super helpful, and she said, "Yeah, sure, I'll help you out. What's your name?" I tell her my name. I hear files rummaging through on the side of the phone. "Can you spell your name?" I spell it. More files. "What's your social security number?" More files. "I'm sorry, you're not in our system." So it turns out, Jeff, I had missed a key piece of information, that you have to apply to the school and to the congressman's office. It's like a parallel path of applications. So here it is late in the senior year of my high school, and I effectively hadn't applied to the place I was really, really wanted to go to. But crazily enough, and it's interesting how life just works out, my best friend and I had planned to join his dad, who was taking a business trip from Maine down to Washington, D.C., like an 8-hour drive or whatever, the next week, which was our spring vacation. And so I joined them, and we did that, and except the only change now is I took an afternoon one of those days and went from D.C. to Annapolis, like 30 minutes away, went to the admissions office, and the woman said, "Oh, I remember your story. Yeah, you need to see Captain Malillo, Marine Corps captain. He's our New England area representative. He'll get you all squared away. He's in his office right now. Go down the hall, third door on the right. You can't miss him." I walked down the hall. I never met an active duty military person in my life before, let alone a stereotypical Marine. And I turned the corner and asked what I saw. And you probably know who I'm talking about. It's like perfect uniform, square jaw haircut, shoes you see your reflection in, like fit as a crazy fit person. And I was very intimidated, like, whoa, okay. And I I thought, I want to say, I hope you're not Captain Melillo, are you? But his name tag said Melillo. And so I proceeded to tell him my story. He kind of nodded a little bit and then said, okay, I understand, I'll get back to you. Very short time in his office, 5, 6, 7 minutes maybe tops. He asked a little bit of questions, but not a lot. And so I go back to my hometown on the drive home thinking, okay, well, at least I tried, but the Naval Academy is not in my future. The next week, I'm in school and I get paged to the main office for a phone call, and it's him. And he says, hey, Cassidy, Captain Melillo from Annapolis, I got good news. I can get you into the Naval Academy prep school, but I need to have an answer right now on the phone if you accept that. And I didn't know, Jeff, I didn't know where the prep school was, what it meant, the time commitments, none of that. But I just kind of felt like, okay, this is a door that's slightly open. What side do you want to be on? And so I said, yes, sir, I'm in. And I share that story in such detail because if it wasn't for Captain Melillo, a person that didn't know me, didn't owe me a thing, didn't know me from any other knucklehead 18-year-old out there in the world, he gave me a gift of an opportunity. It was to get to the prep school. Turns out if it's in 1 year in Newport, Rhode Island, if you maintain certain grades, you automatically get admitted to the Naval Academy. While I was at the Naval Academy, I learned about SEALs. I had never heard of Navy SEALs before. There was great mentors on the staff there at the school. After graduation, I got in the SEAL teams. While I was in the SEAL teams, I met Bill Shepard, who was the very first Navy SEAL to become an astronaut. And he's the one that got me excited, guided me, mentored me through the process, and encouraged me to apply. Up till then, I thought you had to be a pilot, actually. You couldn't be an astronaut unless you were a pilot, mistakenly, I thought. And so Captain Shepard kind of led me down that path, and then 28 years later, I retired from the Navy and had all those experiences, all because one person gave me the gift of an opportunity. And I really take time to reflect on that now because, like you, Jeff, you're doing great things with this podcast. You and I, and all the listeners, probably many of them, are in a position where we can be Captain Melillo for others. Or maybe we all have our own, the listeners have their own version of Captain Melillo in their lives. And it's just so important, I think, to guide people, mentor people, give people opportunities when you're able. And I'm so thankful for him for putting me on that trajectory.
What a wonderful story, and it is so true, and it is very true in the aviation world of most of our audience as well here. So many people find the passion in their life because someone took an interest or someone was willing to mentor them or help them, give them a leg up. Your story is really, really fascinating, especially since you cleared the toughest hurdle first. You got the congressional recommendation that is usually pretty difficult to come by, and to have someone catch you up. Tell me a little bit about, I had never heard of the prep school before. How exactly does that work?
Each service academy has one. Navy's is in Newport, so it's geographically separated. Air Force is right on the base there, and I'm pretty sure West Point is on the West Point campus as well. But so it's largely used for recruited athletes, kind of like a redshirt year to get you buffed up academically. You take the exact same course curriculum that you will be faced your freshman year, your plebe year at whatever service academy. So you're exposed to all those same challenging courses. And then if you're an athlete, it's to get you another year with practicing and getting more physically mature or whatever. In my case, there's a few of us, and many times too, it's for prior enlisted service members, whatever service, and maybe it's been a couple years since you've been in the academic environment. So it's a nice way to ease back into the academic environment. Remember how to do integrals and those kind of things before you get thrust right into the deep end as a freshman at the service academy. In my case, I stumbled in it because of the story you described, but it was the best thing that ever happened to me. In that 1 year, there's a huge difference. You don't know it at the time, but as you know, Jeff, there's a huge difference in maturity between a 18-year-old and a 19-year-old. Mm-hmm. And then arriving as a plebe at Navy, already understanding military rank structure, already having the jargon down, understanding basic things that people right out of high school didn't have to learn at the same time they're getting yelled at. It was just the best thing that ever happened to me.
That's another really important point, because one of the things that seems to be a common theme about some of the most amazing, inspiring individuals like yourself is the things that could easily be viewed as setting your path, taking a crooked course, or kind of derailing you temporarily or pointing you in a different direction, often turn out to be blessings in disguise. And that I was going to ask you if you thought that it was actually better than had you made the application.
I've thought about this so many times. It was, life is just amazing how it works. It's supposed to work that way, and that's exactly what I was set up for success. I did better my plebe year than a lot of my classmates because of the things I described, the head start you have, and then the smart kids from high school quickly caught up. But that semester or two of you know, having a little head start was so beneficial for me.
Yeah, I think it's so important for people, especially kids, to hear the stories that include either missteps or other things, the twists and turns along the way, because that way when they face it, they're not as discouraged about what that might mean to their future.
Yeah.
Now, what is it? I'm curious. Was it being near the coast or whatever, having no direct connection, as you mentioned, to the military? What drew you towards the Navy in particular?
I wish it was again a grand fancy answer, but I liked the setting of Annapolis better than I applied to Air Force, but I wasn't super all in because I wasn't really sure I wanted to be that far away from New England. And I really liked my coastal town in Maine. I saw that in the coastal area of Annapolis. It's a beautiful area. And then I realized, I'm impressed with my young self, actually. I realized that in Annapolis, you can just walk out the gate and you have town. Whereas in West Point, New York, you're driving for an hour and a half to get to like McDonald's.
Yeah, there's no locals hanging around when you leave.
No, there's no locals. There's no like walk out in town and get a milkshake. Nothing. Yeah.
So, okay, so you go from there through, of course, the academy, but there's a big leap between that and becoming an elite Navy SEAL. Tell me a little bit about that journey.
So again, interesting. I graduated high school in 1988, pre-internet, of course, and not a lot of Navy SEAL stuff out there. There were a few Vietnam-era Navy SEAL books, one of which I had read just because I was semi-interested in that stuff, but not to the point of I read it because I wanted to be a SEAL. I just saw the book and I checked it out from my high school library. So it wasn't until I got to the Navy prep school, and it's co-located with Officer Candidate School in the Navy. The prep school and the OCS are right next door, and you share the same dining hall.
Oh wow!
And so a lot of the enlisted Navy SEALs who were selected for commissioning programs and through OCS would come to Newport, and I saw a few of them in the dining hall. They were fit guys and just impressive looking, and you could tell different, and had a huge big old this thing trident on their shirt. And I remember all of us young kids were like, "Who is that? What is that patch? What is?" And this mystique of ooh, those are Navy SEAL guys. And so I learned about it briefly there, but again, it didn't resonate that would be something I would be interested in until I got to the Naval Academy. And what I really liked about the Academy, and I imagine all the service academies are the same, where they have great mentors from all the different communities that are available to somebody to select upon graduation. So people there from surface and submarines and aviation and Marine Corps and SEALs who are there as mentors on the staff, and they have collateral jobs within the academy, but there were a couple really awesome SEAL guys on the staff, and they were so welcoming and so patient answering questions, and PT'd the heck out of us, and it just felt like a nice little community within the community. And I got kind of the bug probably my end of my freshman year, maybe early sophomore year, and then got real serious about it and continued to work out, and then ultimately got one of the positions. Every year with the seniors you effectively, we actually lined up. They would call class order number 1 to 50, show up to the main office, and you line up 1 to 50, and they do that all the way to the 1,000 person at the very last of the line, and you'd get, that person will be told where they're going. But in the beginning, you have options, and now I think it's all done electronically or whatever, but the same concept is the same. You pick by order of merit within your class rank. And so I was a good student. I was like 150 out of 1,000 or so, not an amazing student, but solid enough that I was pretty sure I'd get one of the 16 SEAL positions, because in addition, you had to have done some prerequisites. So it wasn't open to anybody to select. We kind of knew within ourselves who were the folks eligible. So yeah, by the time I was a senior, I was all in. I was excited to be a SEAL, and had done all the prep work.
Wow. And obviously most people are familiar with SEALs other than news stories and things like that, but also from what they see in movies and about how difficult it is, even at that point, so being able to select it to make it into that. Yeah. What was that process like for you?
So SEAL training, so I selected it in my senior year. You finish graduation, I got about 30 days of vacation built up, and then drove right to San Diego, California, and started BUDS. It's an acronym for Basic Underwater Demolition / the S is SEAL training, and it's in Coronado Island, and it's effectively 6 months long. The first 2 months is all about physical fitness, and the 5th week of that first 2 months is called Hell Week. I'll talk about that in a second. The second 2 months is all about diving and learning to scuba dive and the different equipment that we have for operations underwater. And the third 2 months is land warfare, where there's an island off the coast of San Diego called San Clemente Island, and we go out there for the better part of the last 2 months, and then you're done. But there's still more training to do. But it's kind of like in aviation terms, you complete basic flight school. Now you got to go. In the Navy, they call it the RAG. I don't know what other branches call it, where you go to an operational school. You learn how to be an operational pilot instead of just you can keep it straight and level kind of pilot. So BUDS is like the basic training, and now you go to more advanced training before you get assigned to a unit directly.
Wow.
There's lots of stories I could share within that. I don't know where you want to go or how much time you want to spend on it, but
how was your Hell Week? How's that?
Yeah, Hell Week is an interesting thing. It starts on Sunday and ends on Friday, and it's just one big blur of activities. And there's a couple key lessons out of it. One is it pays to be a winner, and that sounds a little could be construed as negative, but the essence of it pays to be a winner is if you put out 110% and your boat crew wins, or is some cases first or second, there's usually about 10 or 15 boat crews of 8 to 10 guys. And if your boat crew wins a race, you get to rest until everyone completes it or not. So what it instilled, it's a little bit out of competition, but it really instills this: go all in all the time, put in your 100% effort, and you can get rewarded for a good job. So I loved that nature of it. And then the other advice I got before I started was just make it to the next meal. And you're kind of like, well, what does that mean? Of course I'm going to get to the next meal. But it's really brilliant in its simplicity. It takes a ton of calories to go through training, but specifically Hell Week, right? Like your body is burning, I don't even know, maybe 12,000 calories a day. I'm not sure. I probably screw up the number, but a ton. And you have to eat a lot to keep up with that output and be able to have the energy to go. So they have to feed you. And the advice is really simple: is no matter how painful it is right now, you're going to get a break to eat. So it's only going to last at most 3 hours, and depending on where you are in that interval. So just kind of think about it in this chunk of meal to meal. And then when you get to the dining hall, of course you're not going to quit. You got a warm plate of food, you got hot coffee, nobody's yelling at you, you can eat as much as you want. And so that advice was perfect for me. It's like, okay. And in some cases, Jeff, you realize that the quote meal is too far. It's such a hard time right now. I just got to run one more telephone pole, or all I just got to do is one more push-up. I can't even think about the chow hall right now. That's crazy far in the future. So what I loved about that now later in life is it applies to life too, right? Like you can divide up things. If you think about being a certified instrument rated pilot the day you're starting out as a brand new aviator, you're lost in the sea of trees, right? Like you just have to figure out flying straight and level. Then you just got to figure out to your first solo, and then you add a little bits as you go. And so that's what I love about the make it to the next meal. It applies to us in our any day, you know, whether it's getting through a challenging health situation or tough relationship time, just make it to the next meal.
Oh, that is a really, really good way of thinking of things. I like that a lot. Take me through a little bit of your service, of what you're able to say, at least, about some of your service before we get to your space time with NASA. You obviously, as I mentioned in the introduction, have been awarded 2 Bronze Stars and the Presidential Unit Citation Award. Is there something you can tell us about that time?
Oh, yeah, sure. Lots, actually. But I drove, right after SEAL training, I drove underwater vehicles called SEAL delivery vehicles. It was awesome. Yeah, basically like a plane, but flying through the water column. And we would drive at about 20 feet. We'd launch from a full-size submarine. You could Google SEAL delivery vehicle.
I will be.
Yeah. And very rudimentary, the version I drove, very, very rudimentary instruments, a wet round compass and an altimeter. Well, actually a depth gauge. We did have an altimeter too that was Doppler off the bottom, but most of the time in the ocean it's too far, too deep until you get into the harbor. And then a knot meter. So we would just navigate by time, speed, distance, and a little kind of ink blot like interpretation sonar thing that you could basically just use to not hit walls. But so that was a lot. I loved that job, really, because once you submerged, it was you and your buddy figuring out problems and together with nobody else's help, because the physics of the water prevents you from talking to anybody except each other. And oftentimes that's just with hand squeezes and pushing each other's leg. And so I just really enjoyed that. And then I went to grad school for 2 years and then went out to SEAL Team 3 in 2000. And SEAL Team 3, we would deploy to the Middle East. So our platoon, we knew we were deploying to the Middle East, and our scheduled time was Thanksgiving time of 2001. And so for 2 years, we were training and we were all ready to go. In August of 2001, we were complete with all of our training. And then the next couple of weeks, September 11th happened, and so it advanced our deployment a little, and we effectively went right to Kandahar, Afghanistan, where I was in the first 7 months of that whole conflict, and that's a whole nother hour-long talk. The United States, we knew Bin Laden was there. We were tracking him by radio communications, and then eventually the bad guys figured out, hey, if we don't push this little push-to-talk button on the radio, bombs don't fall on our heads. And so they got a little smarter with their radio discipline, and it became really hard to track them. And spoiler alert, it took a decade or whatever to find them subsequently. But we were really, really close. One particular night, I remember we were on a mission in the Tora Bora area. It's kind of the Afghan-Pakistan area, border area, and came around the corner and heard bush of this mountainous, rugged area, and heard bushes wiggle. And this is nighttime, late in like January at high altitude, so really cold. And we look down, and there's a warm bedroll and a pot of tea, super hot, almost boiling. So the guy had heard us, and I don't think that was Bin Laden. Of course it wasn't, but that was probably the early warning person for their perimeter, and he disappeared and turned around the corner, and he was gone. So we were really close, the whole United States. We were really close to finding those guys right then, and then they just disappeared.
That is amazing. Yeah, and as you mentioned, you will be back to talk about those things in more detail because I know our audience wants to hear some of that.
Yeah, and some good aviation stories about from the ground perspective, calling in ordnance, communicating with pilots and passing up coordinates. I remember one in particular night where, because JDAM bombs take degrees, minutes, point minutes, and we were calling in a coordinate position that was so close to ours that only the point after the minute, the decimal of the minutes was the only digit that changed, and I was like, oh my God, this is crazy. And anyways, lots of stories there that pilots would enjoy, I think.
Wow, that is fascinating. And what was it like when that hit?
It was, there's like a 45 seconds, 60 seconds when the pilot says bombs released until the impact, and like the last probably second and a half, you can get this sense that you can kind of see the thing coming, and you almost can hear it. And we knew. So the longer version is we didn't have a laser rangefinder with coordinates. We just had a laser distance finder, and we knew our compass bearing. So we were calculating manually the distance, the coordinates of the enemy, using a compass and a distance from our position. And so we estimated long, and so the bombs kept getting closer and closer as we chopped down the distance of our overestimation, if you know what I'm talking about.
Wow.
So by the time the fourth one came, we knew it was going to be a jaw smacker, and it was. It's like,
oh man.
But it got them. It got the bad guys.
Wow. Okay, so only because we don't have the 5 hours I would love to spend with you, tell me how that life and that world operating out in Afghanistan, SEAL Team 3, transitioned to your time with NASA.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I mentioned at the beginning, I met Bill Shepard, who was the first Navy SEAL to become an astronaut, and I met him while I was in grad school, right before the 9/11 deployment that I was just talking about. And so I had applied. We select astronauts about every 4 years. I had applied in the class of 2000 before 9/11 and before I completed grad school, and I didn't get selected. I didn't get an interview, but Bill Shepard, he encouraged me to apply, and because in 4 years later you'll be a better applicant. And he was absolutely right. 4 years later, I had grad school behind me. I had experience in Afghanistan as a small unit leader, and I was just a better applicant, and I got selected. So in 2004, I actually got that would be the second phone call that changed the trajectory of my life. Remember, the first one was Captain Malillo welcoming me to the Navy, or giving me the opportunity to go in the Navy. And the second one was from the chief astronaut at NASA saying, hey, would you like to come work for us? And so I did in the summer of 2004. People don't realize that when you get selected as an astronaut, if you're a civilian, you become a government civil servant and you get your pay structure through that system. If you're military, like I was, you just stay active duty. Your duty station orders become the Johnson Space Center. You keep your same pay grade and all of your same stuff, and you just get advanced when your year group is turned to be advanced up to 06, in my case, Navy captain or Army colonel. So I remained active duty Navy guy the whole time I was at NASA.
And what was it that got you interested in that? Just meeting Bill Shepard, or what was it about space that was drawing you there? Because I mean, in your role, there's a million different things you could have done. That's a very interesting one to choose.
Yeah, I mean, of course, as an American kid, about NASA, and I was in maybe sophomore in high school when the Challenger accident happened. I remember sitting there rolling in the TVs into the cafeteria, and we're watching it. So I knew about NASA, but it wasn't until talking to Shep that I was enlightened that anybody can apply. At the time, you just had to be a U.S. citizen and have a college degree in a STEM major, which I had both. And they've since added a master's requirement if there's anybody listening that's interested. But I met the basic criteria, and I remember thinking to myself, well, this is a no-brainer. All it cost me is a couple hours of time putting an application together, and if I get selected, how amazing would that be? And if I don't, I love what I'm doing in the SEAL team. So it's like no lose situation for me. And that's how it was. And I kind of understood that statistically, it's unlikely any one individual is going to be an astronaut. There's a lot of people that apply, and each year there's 10 to 15 to 12 maybe spots. So I knew that it was a long shot, but why not try?
Wow. And so you got the call. Tell me about the call.
Yeah, it was interesting. I had just come home from my second deployment from Afghanistan, and the astronaut selection committee knew I was deployed overseas and hard guy to get a hold of when you're in that situation. So I had received an email the Friday before that said, "Hey, Chris, please call the astronaut selection office on Monday at noon Central Time." In that weekend, I redeployed from Afghanistan back to Virginia, my home. So I was actually in my kitchen in Norfolk, Virginia, at the appointed time, and they actually called me, which I was waiting to call them, but the phone rang, and it was the chief astronaut, and he said those words, "Would you like to come work for us?" And I remember being all excited. My kids were young; they didn't quite get it, but they knew that their dad was happy, and so they were happy as a result, and moved from Virginia to Houston. And the nice thing as a family is I got to be active duty military with all the benefits of retiring that way, but my kids went to the same school district for pretty much their whole school life, which is unheard of for active duty military people.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So one of the things I'm very interested in is I have heard the stories of going through astronaut training and what that process is like from a variety of different people, but never from a Navy SEAL. And so it must have been a little bit different with all the experience you had going into that role.
Well, you know, it's interesting because a class of astronauts comes from all different populations. We had 3 school teachers at Navy SEAL, 3 pilots, a couple military non-pilots, a couple of research engineers and physicists, and so we all had different strengths. I was definitely more equipped to the underwater stuff. The training that we do for spacewalks, we do it in a big pool in Houston, and that was a natural environment for me. But I had never looked at like wiring diagrams, hydraulic diagrams, electrical diagrams, and schematics of airplanes and aircraft, which is the same as a spacecraft, basically, when you're looking at the schematic systems. So how to look at that piece of paper and soak it in so that I could answer test questions was a foreign concept to me. So I remember my pilot classmates, I was like, man, those guys are a whiz. They just look at a diagram and they're like, oh, that's the redundant hydraulic valve and blah, 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 cross feed to this. And I was like, but you get in the pool, and I was way ahead. So we all had different strengths and weaknesses, which was really cool as a class. And the training is wonderful there, and everybody gets up to speed by the end of the time you graduate from your astronaut candidate period of time, which is 2 years. The class is all ready to go, and you're able to be contributing. But since this is an aviation related meeting, we fly the T-38 at NASA for astronaut training, and that's a pretty big jump to go from 0 aviation experience right into the T-38, and NASA understands that. So thankfully, they send all the non-pilot new guys to Pensacola, and we go through effectively what the Navy flight surgeon program is, where you get ground school, you get exposed to aviation, you do some basic flight maneuvers, and you spend about, I forget, 2 months, maybe 3 months in Pensacola, and get to the point where you're safe enough to not eject yourself, and then you come back to Houston, and then you transition into the T-38. And I thought I was just a talented young aviator at the time after my crusty 3 months of flying. I got into that T-38, and man, when they hit the burners and released the brakes on takeoff, my brain was stuck at the numbers, and the aircraft was out over the Gulf of Mexico. And that's what I think the value of the T-38 for us as astronaut training is because it's fast moving, and it really forces the 2-person concept of working checklists and challenge and reply, and whose division of duties within the cockpit and the resource management with all that. I just love it. I retired with about 1,100 hours in the T-38, all in the backseat. You know, I would not, if you're,
Yeah,
unless
that's
you
a lot.
yeah, like 0.75 hours, per flight, right? A lot of flights, but I loved it. I just really enjoyed it, and one of the things I miss greatly about my time in NASA is hopping in a T-38 and flying around.
That is wild, man. So tell me then about, well, one thing that occurred to me, of course, is that with everybody coming in with strengths and areas that they were going to excel at by their background, and weaknesses in areas they may have had no exposure, as you mentioned, is some of that intentional in forming a team and helping each other and kind of gelling that way?
Yeah, and NASA I think does a great job of having a diverse class, not just by military service. Different branches are represented by race and ethnicity, by technical background as well. And I think that's the beauty of it that makes the class stronger, and where you can rely on. And it's helpful. Later in my career, I became the chief astronaut, and the primary responsibility for that person is to assign individuals to the certain crews. And so it was really nice to know that you had this kind of broad swath of strengths amongst different people. And if you really needed a spacewalk mission, you could lean on this person. If you really needed a strong robotic person, you could go here. If you really needed a health science kind of mission for research experiments, you go to this person. So it helps a lot later to make the strongest crew to deliver the mission for the country.
That has got to be the most popular person in the entire facility if you're the ones picking who's on every crew.
Yeah, right. Like, I don't know if you ever watched this show For All Mankind.
Yes, I've been watching it.
I love it. I binge watch it, but it's so accurate in terms of the culture, because Deke Slayton was the god of everything, because he was the sole person that decided who was going on the missions, and it's true to this day.
That's funny. For everybody who's watching, For All Mankind is on Apple TV, and a fantastic series with we'll just say a little bit of a spin on history, and on taking a left turn of how it could have gone. And that is fascinating that that you like that show and you believe that it's an interesting representation of everything. So tell me about your first mission.
Oh man, it's so you're an astronaut candidate for 2 years, and then you're really just in line waiting for your turn. And space shuttle crews would get together about a year or so before launch, and every now and then there'd be an announcement or an email that would say, all right, all astronauts assemble in the conference room at 1300 or whatever. And you generally knew that's a flight crew announcement. And most of the time, the chief will tell the individuals before the general assembly, but occasionally it doesn't happen, and the person is surprised in the room with everybody else. And it's really exciting time. Everybody's so happy for each other and hugging and high-fiving. And so I remember I got my first shuttle mission was in the summer of 2009. So it was like the spring of 2008 where I got called to come to the chief astronaut. I'm like, oh God, did I pay my wardroom dues? Did I park in the wrong spot? What did I do wrong? And he said, hey, congratulations, you're on STS-127. And an hour later, we had the all hands meeting, and it was so cool. And so then you start training in the shuttle. All of your training is in Houston. Everything is there. You fly to Florida periodically to see some actual piece of what we call flight hardware, or otherwise you're looking at training mock-ups in Houston, which is generally fine, but there's sometimes nuances between the real box or the real gizmo than the simulator. And so yeah, we trained in Houston for that whole year. I had a Canadian astronaut, Japanese astronaut, and the rest of the crew were Americans. And We launched in July of 2009, but we actually tied the record for the most launch attempts without launching, which was we launched on the 6th one. Turns out trying to launch from Florida in the summertime, there's a lot of rain clouds you're dancing with, and you couple that with, oftentimes it can be clear in Florida, but you have to have a clear alternate landing path in Europe, which is Spain. There's a couple in Spain, and so sometimes the launch guests would be standing and clear in a million in Cocoa Beach, and you're weathered out for the alternate site in Spain. So anyways, that was tough. Each crew member has 250 launch guest passes, and it's like a wedding. They fill out instantly. And by the time I actually launched after a month of delays, I had 15 people there in Florida watching, but doesn't take away from the incredible feeling that it is. There's so many emotions, Jeff. There's pride, you know, you're wearing an American flag on your uniform. There's nerves, like especially my first mission, like am I prepared? Did I study enough? Do I know? Am I going to be able to do the things when they ask me to do them? There's excitement, like you've been training for a long time, and here it is, and just all these nerves and just emotions. And then you get onto the rocket. You climb in that thing about 3 hours before liftoff, so you buckle in, and then you're actually lying there for a while. It's 3 hours is a long time when you're lying on your back, waiting for the clock to. And so finally, you get to about 30 minutes, and there's a T-minus 9 minutes, which is roughly, there's a built-in hold, so it's about 30 minutes from real launch. That's when you get the final go for launch from Houston, and the weather guy says go. And you come out of that clock, and the clock's winding down, and really there's nothing stopping unless there's a technical problem at that point. And I just remember being so excited. And then the engines lit, and you could see fire kind of coming all around, and then the whole thing starts to leave and it was really jiggly and wiggly. The simulator does an amazing job, but it doesn't have all the noises and moving that the real one does. And if you remember, the shuttle had the orange fuel tank in the middle that the shuttle's bolted to, and then 2 white solid rocket motors. Well, those solid rocket motors are solid fuel. It looks like a number 2 pencil eraser. You could poke it with your finger, the fuel. And so it burns really bumpy. And nobody told me that. So on the first 2 minutes, which is the bulk of the thrust is coming from those solids, just really, really violent. Like if you tried to write a number on your knee board, you couldn't read it. And I remember looking over at the commander, like I was thinking, this is nuts. If he's cool with this, I'm cool with this. And he's just like, Houston, we have a roll program, and he just calm as cucumber. And I'm like, okay, this is normal. And then 2 minutes go by, those solids go off, and then it just gets silky smooth. The thrust coming from the liquid main engines purring like a kitten, and you could hardly even tell there was motion except for the acceleration. The seats are organized so that the vector of the G's is into your chest, not like our pilots who are watching who pull back on the stick, and the vector of that G pulls the blood out of your head. We don't have that problem of passing out. It's just a little harder to breathe, a little harder to lift your arms. So we work in about 3.5 G's for the bulk of the 8.5 minutes to flight.
Wow. That is amazing. And of course, your expertise with the spacewalks, et cetera. Tell me about your first spacewalk.
Oh man. So our shuttle, most of the shuttles were all about 2 weeks long. The shuttle Endeavour, the one we flew on, had extra oxygen tanks so it could stay a few more days. So, and then you would do that if you needed more spacewalks. So normally a space shuttle mission would have 3 spacewalks on this when you're assembling the space station in those weeks. Endeavour could have 5 spacewalks. So I was a part of the spacewalk team, but my first spacewalk wasn't until the 3rd one of those 5. So I did spacewalk 3, 4, and 5. And so I was the suitor upper for the first 2, watching my teammates go out. And I remember just being nervous and excited and real thinking, oh my God, I'm putting the glove on my teammate whose hand is going to be in the vacuum of space. And so I had this sort of hyping myself until the real day for me. And a real funny story real quick. you put the suit on and then you go into this tiny compartment called the crew lock, which because you want to minimize how much air you dump overboard and save the resource. And so we're venting the crew lock, and the pressure. My crewmate had said, he was an experienced guy and he's kind of funny. He said, remember, when it gets below 2 psi, it's the death zone. Your suit better work. And I was like, okay. And I watched the gauge go below 2, and I'm like, okay, here we are in the death zone. And then, but you can't, the pumps can't get every last puff of air, every last molecule of air out. So when they give you the go to open the hatch, you actually have to pull up on the hatch seals with some force to get it open. And there happened to be a drink straw, like a little straw from a drink, like nothing's that floated out of the trash can earlier in the day, had been in the crew lock nobody noticed it. And right at that moment when I opened the hatch, the straw, that last puff of air went out when I opened, and the straw went and disappeared into the white clouds. And I remember thinking, oh my God, I don't want to be that straw. Don't let go, don't let go, don't. And I was like frozen for a second. And it was probably only 5 seconds, but nobody else noticed, but I noticed like how it was just this moment of, what are you doing here? And then you settle in real quick, and we tell new astronauts, just pretend you're in the pool. It's another day of training. There just happens to be an Earth below you. And that's good advice, because you just kind of settle right in. I don't know if anybody's, in my aviation training, I had a seasoned pilot tell me, just wiggle your toes. If you're having trouble holding altitude, if you're flying formation and the guy's wing, you just can't get it locked in, just wiggle your toes. And that's amazing advice. And so I remember wiggling my toes and just kind of settling in and get on with it. But spacewalks are super cool. They're 6.5, 7 hours long, very, very detailed plan. You're working hand in hand with your buddy who's next to you, and also your buddy who's in mission control, reading the instructions to you. And yeah, just amazing. I've got to do 10 of them, and I loved every single second.
That's fantastic. And of course, if anyone ever comes across a straw in orbit, we know where that came from.
We know where it came from, right?
It would seem from when you said that going into the pool for the training, it was just your absolute natural environment as a Navy SEAL. Did you find then that spacewalks in particular just fit with all the training that you had as a SEAL?
Yeah. For one thing, the spacesuit is a physically limiting thing, and the longer your arms are, the better off you are, and the broader your shoulders, the better, because the torso is this fiberglass thing, and people with narrower shoulders, sometimes the fiberglass might hit your bicep, and so it's hard to move your arm when it gets impinged at the bicep level. And so for me, the suit fit really, really well, which is uncontrolled by anybody but God, right? I just happened to have good arm length for it, so that helped a lot. And also just being like, I like tinkering in my garage. I know you're working on an airplane there. I'd love to come over and turn wrenches. That kind of stuff is fun for me. I love figuring out how things work. And so you're basically a construction worker on a spacewalk. And so it's just a very natural environment for me to work in.
That is so cool. Really amazing. What was your kind of favorite, I guess, favorite thing that you remember from being an astronaut?
There's a couple. It's the first time you see Earth out the window when you're still inside the spacecraft. That's hard to beat. For me, we launched on the shuttle. 30 minutes later, we were over the Straits of Gibraltar. I remember seeing Morocco to the south, and Europe and Spain under, and the Mediterranean. It was amazing. Closely second with that first time opening the hatch, the thing I just described with this, other than the terror of the straw, that moment of, oh my God, I'm actually outside the spacecraft. But this answer might surprise you, and just seeing Earth in general is amazing. But one of the things that the memory that I'll never ever forget, it is the International Space Station. So your crew is made up from people all around the world: Japan, Canada, Europe, several different European nations, Russian cosmonauts, American astronauts, and you eat dinner together around the same table, and you've got a window with the Earth going by below you. You've got music from all the different countries shuffling on the music player, different food being shared. I just really, really enjoyed feeling like I was representing the United States of America on a mission, international mission that was meaningful. And it just, that's hard to appreciate in the moment, because in the moment you're like, hey, are you done with the chicken? Can I have the last piece? But in retrospect, that was probably my favorite thing, is that dinner table with all the nations represented.
Wow, that is absolutely fantastic. Well, I want to make sure we also have time to talk about what your current mission is. And you know, General Patrick Brady was here on the show, Medal of Honor winner, and amazing, just truly amazing individual that we both know. Tell me what brought you to work for the National Medal of Honor Museum Foundation, and inform everybody about what it is and what its mission is.
Right. So I was wrapping up my NASA career, and my actual buddy that I went through SEAL training with way back in 1993, he had gone on, did a Navy career, and then got out in the civilian world. Now he was on the board of directors, and he still is, of our foundation, and they were searching for a new CEO, and he heard through the friend network that I was getting out of the military and leaving NASA, and he called me and said, hey, would you be interested in coming up here and learning about the Medal of Honor Museum and maybe being the CEO? And he's a good friend, so I'm like, no, I can't get past the third plaque in most museums. I'm not your guy, which is a little bit of a stretch, but I was kind of joking with him. But then he said, no, seriously, come on. I was in Houston. Come on up to Dallas, check it out. So I did, and it just felt really right. So the Medal of Honor is our nation's highest award for valor on the battlefield. There's 3,500 have ever been awarded since the Civil War. President Lincoln was the president that put it into effect, and there's 60 of them, of these humans living today, of which General Brady is one of them. And I was surprised, and most people are, that there doesn't exist a national museum for them. Now, there's plenty of places that talk about the Medal of Honor. There's smaller exhibits, and Chattanooga, Tennessee actually has probably the best one that's dedicated to the Medal of Honor, but it's more focused on the Tennessee recipients. And so you'd think that there'd be one in DC, but there isn't. And the organization, which I'm now a part of, but a little before I got there, thought, well, maybe we should put it in Washington, DC, but it turns out it's really hard to get land to put a museum in there, and you're competing with the Smithsonian's, which are all free. So the decision, very wisely, was made, let's put the museum somewhere else in the country, and we'll put a monument on the mall in DC. And so there was a national competition among cities, and the final two were Denver and the Arlington, Texas, DFW area, and the committee selected DFW, middle of the country, big airports, football stadium, Cowboys, baseball stadium, the Rangers. There's a Six Flags there, big hotel, convention center. It's a great spot for a museum. Yeah. And the can-do build spirit in Texas is really something that shouldn't be overlooked either. Like, very, very cooperative city. The permitting process has been, the city works hand in hand with us, unlike, other places where you might have a little bit of a fight. So anyways, long story short, we're really excited to be delivering the museum. We'll open in 10 months from now, March of next year. We're also creating a leadership institute, which will really be the vehicle that will tell the stories and inspire people through these stories of courage and sacrifice and commitment. And that has a youth component and adult component. We're working really hard to make sure that the youth component is focused on character excellence and doing the right thing and integrity and that sort of thing. And we've got an electronic program that's in classrooms right now, and we're piloting an more in-person program that will accompany field trips as they come to the museum when we open. So lots of excitement there. We're raising money and building a building, and it's totally separate from space flight. It's unlike anything I've ever done, but you know what? It's good to be a new guy every now and then and learn new stuff, I think. In all seriousness, I think it's healthy to learn new things, and for me, it's been rejuvenating to learn the business side of a nonprofit. Is a nonprofit, but it's also a non-loss. You can't make stupid decisions and waste donor money.
Yeah.
So it's been really, really nice learning experience for me.
And what a wonderful mission to be on, to honor those individuals, both with us and no longer with us. I really hold you in high esteem for taking that role, and for the work that you're doing, and the work that General Brady is doing to honor those who served at such an incredibly high level.
His helicopter is the largest artifact that we'll have in the museum. It's really focused on the individual stories, biographies of people is really the focus of the museum, not so much military history. But his helicopter will be in there, and it's just completed restoration, and it arrives here in Arlington June 20th. So what, 2 weeks from now?
Oh, I'm gonna have to get a picture of that.
Yeah, we'll send you one, and it goes in. The building is suspended in the air by about 60 feet, and so a crane has to lift it in. And he joked around that he was going to auto rotate into the position, but we wouldn't let him do that.
Oh, that is so cool. So can you just tell us what how people can find the museum? I know it opens 7 months from now, but online, obviously.
Yeah, thanks for asking. The website is mohmuseum.org, mohmuseum.org. You learn all about, you can see renderings of the building, what it looks like today, grand openings March of next year, and learn about our leadership programs, and it's all there, mohmuseum.org.
Fantastic. All right, well, Chris, this is the time of the show where we like to do what we call SocialFlight's Fast Five, where we can go through 5 questions to get to know you a little bit better. Are you ready for SocialFlight's Fast Five?
Yes, we are go for 5.
Go for 5. Excellent. All right. Question number 1. You've been obviously a Navy SEAL and astronaut. What was the most surprising thing that you really didn't expect about being an astronaut?
That living in space, somebody else writes your schedule to the 5-minute interval, and you have to do your best to stay on schedule all day long, every day. So that this race against the clock every day was something that you can be told about, but until you experience somebody else planning your day down to 5-minute intervals, it takes some getting used to.
Wow, I didn't even know it was down to that level, but every single day.
It takes 5 minutes to go pee and do all the machinery, so it's not even on the calendar.
And you got you managed to get the one thing that always shows up in the astronaut thing of going to the bathroom in space. So excellent job including that one as well.
Very good. Exactly.
Okay, question number 2, and this is especially applicable given your incredibly varied background. Out of everything that you've done in your career, what strikes you as being a moment or a story that was quite frightening, or something that you ended up learning quite a bit about yourself from?
The moment we were getting on a helicopter to leave Kandahar Airfield to go into our first combat mission. We'd been in country for just a week or so, and I hadn't really thought about the gravity of command at that point. You know, we were just in detailed planning and getting our ducks in a row and making sure everybody had the equipment and resources. But I remember the rotors spinning on the helicopter and walking on. Myself and the platoon chief were the last ones on the helicopter, and I remember seeing the eyeballs. It was nighttime and green lights of a helicopter. I remember seeing the eyeballs of all my friends and thinking, man, dude, you got some weight on your shoulders, because you have to make decisions that are going to keep these people safe, and there is no option for a stupid decision. And so I realized that was the reason I was getting a paycheck. It was to make good decisions. There was no other thing I was getting paid for than to make good decisions.
Wow. That is remarkably profound. Thank you for sharing that. All right, well, question number 3. If you had the opportunity to go back in time, not to change anything, just to re-experience something in your life, be there for 5, 10, 15 minutes of it one more time, what would that be?
Oh man, there's so many things I could answer. You know, there's obvious answers about being a dad and all that stuff, but save that for a second. More talking about the professional things. There was one training dive in the SEV where we had the 2 week of training was over and we were doing all night operations, and we had to get the SEV from the submarine into the port of Roosevelt Roads, and it was just a daytime transit with no real mission to it other than just get the equipment into the port. So we didn't have to be sneaky or anything. And I remember we're in the middle of like 10 miles from the port and the sonar just going crazy. I'm like, there's nothing out here that we could be hitting. And we realized that we were, a pod of dolphins was all around us, and it was crystal clear Caribbean water. Where I slid the canopy open, and there's like 2 dolphin heads right here with their noses looking in the cockpit, kind of curious about what we're doing. They're surfing over the bow wave of our mini submarine, and I just didn't want that moment to end. And the two of myself and my buddy Travis, we're like, oh my God, this is so special. It was one of the cooler things I've ever experienced in my life, with this pod of dolphins, just more curious about us than anything.
Oh my goodness, that is absolutely wonderful. What an incredible image. I love that.
Yeah.
All right, question number 4. If there was one thing that you wish you knew back in your teens or 20s, if you could go back and give advice to your younger self back then, say anything, what would it be?
It would be, surround yourself with good people and give 100% every day. Yeah, that's 2 things, I guess, but I would get both of them in there.
We'll count that as 1.
Yeah.
Excellent. And the last question for SocialFlight's Fast 5 for you, Chris, is if you could choose anyone in history, anyone anywhere, alive, dead, doesn't matter, to spend an evening, get a drink, have dinner, someone to sit down with, who would that be?
Ernest Shackleton. Yeah, if people aren't familiar, he led a mission that their ship got stranded in the north and froze over in the ice, and his leadership kept them. Nobody died. Where all the other expeditions, they all would, in those situations, would perish, and the morale would disintegrate, and the people would, start dying off. They lived, I forget how many. It was at least a full year, maybe 2, on the ice, and incredible story. The book is called Endurance. I've always been fascinated by it. I've read it a couple times, and I just think that's the case study in leadership.
That is
how the heck
fantastic, and it's going to become the next book that I read, because I have heard about it and have not actually read it. That's a fantastic answer, and I love that you had it immediately.
Yeah. As you were asking, I knew where you're going with your question. I could tell, and so it took me a couple seconds, but he was right there at the top of my tongue.
That's fantastic, and another little Easter egg for anyone who wants to watch For All Mankind out there.
Right. Amazing. Binge watch it like I did.
Exactly. All right. Well, Chris Cassidy, thank you so much for taking time out of your evening to join us here on SocialFlight Live. I feel like we didn't even begin to scratch the surface or do justice to your career and all that you've done for your country and so many other things that you've accomplished. I hope you'll come back and we can spend a little more time on some of those stories.
Happy to, Jeff. Thank you.
Absolutely. Have a wonderful evening, and thank you so much again for joining us here.
You too. Fly safe.
Good night. And thank all of you for taking time out of your evening to join us here on Social Flight Live. We'll be back next Tuesday evening with a very special show. Tuskegee Airman Colonel George Hardy will be with us. That gentleman is 98 years young, and truly a story and a life that you are going to want to spend some time getting to know. It is a blessing that he is still with us and able to share some of that experience with us. We're then off for a week and back on Tuesday, June 25th with astronaut Story Musgrave, a truly legendary astronaut and a remarkable individual. All you have to do is do a quick search on him and you will be reading his accomplishments for days on end. And so he will be with us on Tuesday, June 25th. Again, at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 5 p.m. Pacific. And so again, thank you for everything that all of you do for General Aviation. Thank you for joining us here on the show on Social Flight Live. And I wish you all blue skies.